wiping the mirror clean again, I tried to ignore the creeping unease that was settling in my chest. I left the bathroom light on that night. The next morning, I woke up to find the bathroom light still on, its harsh glow spilling into the hallway. I scolded myself for being paranoid and wasting electricity. But as I walked past the bathroom door, something I've always liked living alone. There's something comforting about knowing every sound, every movement in your home comes from you. At least, that's what I used to think. My apartment isn't fancy. It's a small one-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of an old building. It creaks in the winter, the plumbing groans in the summer, and the windows rattle every time the wind picks up. But it's mine, and that's enough. I settled into my nightly routine: a cup of chamomile tea, an episode of whatever Netflix suggested, and then bed. The bathroom mirror, streaked and slightly foggy, despite my best cleaning efforts, caught my reflection as I brushed my teeth. Just me, alone, as always. That's why, when I stepped out of the shower the next morning and saw it, my stomach dropped. Written faintly in the condensation on the mirror were the words, "Hello." I froze, staring at the fogged-up glass. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what I was seeing. It wasn't messy or hurried like someone had scrawled it with their finger as a joke. The letters were precise, deliberate, and perfectly spaced. I laughed nervously, my voice too loud in the quiet of the bathroom. Okay, this is weird. Maybe I'd written it myself days ago and forgotten. It was ridiculous, but it was the only explanation that made sense. I grabbed a towel, wiped the mirror clean, and tried to shake the feeling that something was off. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Work was the usual mix of emails and pointless meetings. But as I sat at my desk, I couldn't help but think about the mirror. The image of those perfect, precise letters stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. When I got home that evening, the apartment felt different. It wasn't anything obvious, just a strange heaviness in the air. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. After all, I'd been overthinking everything since this morning. The real fear began later that night. As I stood at the sink, brushing my teeth again, the same streaked mirror stared back at me. My reflection seemed ordinary. Tired eyes, messy hair. But something in my gut told me not to look away. I turned to grab my towel, and when I glanced back, there it was again. This time, the message read, "Who are you?" The toothbrush clattered into the sink as I stumbled back. My heart raced as my eyes scanned the small bathroom. The door was closed, the window sealed tight. There was no one else here. The message wasn't there when I stepped in. It couldn't have been. Could it? I laughed nervously, but it sounded hollow. "You're losing it," I muttered to myself. Maybe I was working too much, or maybe it was the stress of being alone all the time. That had to be it. Jing made me stop. The mirror, the faint letters were back, etched in the thin layer of steam from my shower the night before. "I can see you." My chest tightened. This wasn't leftover condensation or some random smear. The letters were clear, deliberate, and wet. I reached out, hesitating for a moment, and touched the glass. My fingers came away damp. I didn't shower that morning, but the time I got to work, I had convinced myself it was some elaborate prank. Maybe my landlord had a weird sense of humor, or one of my neighbors was trying to freak me out. That made sense. It had to be that. At lunch, I casually asked my coworker, Julia, if anyone had ever experienced weird things in their apartments. She laughed. Like what? Ghosts? Paranormal activity? No, not like that, I lied. Just noises or stuff moving around. Her face turned thoughtful. Well, you do live in the Ashmore building, right? I nodded. Why? Oh, nothing, she said, brushing it off. It's just an old building. Probably just settling. Her answer didn't feel satisfying, but I let it go. That evening, the apartment felt colder than usual. I double-checked the thermostat. 72 degrees. Still, I couldn't shake the chill creeping down my spine. I avoided the bathroom entirely, brushing my teeth in the kitchen sink like a lunatic. Went to bed early, hoping to shake the gnawing discomfort, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old building sounded amplified. My imagination turned them into footsteps. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up in a cold sweat. My bedroom door was open. I didn't remember leaving it open. The following night, I decided to test something. Before bed, I wiped the bathroom mirror clean and took a picture of it with my phone. No messages tonight, I muttered to myself, trying to sound confident. But at 3 a.m., I woke with a start. There was no sound, no movement, just a suffocating sense of being watched. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and flicked on the flashlight. The bathroom door was ajar. I forced myself to get up, each step toward the bathroom, feeling heavier than the last. My hands trembled as I pushed the door open. The mirror was fogged up, and a new message stared back at me. Don't turn around. I froze, the words searing into my brain. I couldn't help it. I turned. There was nothing there. The next day, I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I called my friend Mia, someone I trusted, not to laugh or dismiss my fears. When I explained everything, she was silent for a moment before asking, have you considered, I don't know, cleansing the place? Sage or something? I sighed. Mia, I don't think burning some leaves is going to fix this. Well, you need to do something. You can't just let this keep happening. She was right, but I had no idea what to do. That night, the messages changed. They weren't cryptic anymore. They were addressed to me. The first one, hello? The sight of my own name on the mirror sent chills down my spine. I wiped it clean, but another message appeared moments later. Why won't you talk to me? I stumbled back, my chest heaving. Who are you? I whispered aloud, as if expecting an answer. The mirror stayed silent. I started noticing other changes in the apartment, small things at first. Keys moved from their usual spot, lights flickering, cabinets left open. But it escalated quickly. One night, as I sat on the couch, I heard a faint tapping. It was coming from the bathroom. I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the door, every muscle in my body tense. As I reached the bathroom, the tapping stopped. The silence was deafening. When I turned on the light, I saw it. The words etched into the mirror, dripping with what looked like water. Let me out. Over the next few days, the messages became relentless. They appeared not just on the bathroom mirror, but on other reflective surfaces, windows, my TV screen, even the black surface of my phone when it was off. They were everywhere. I'm here. Why won't you help me? You can't ignore me forever. The entity wasn't just haunting my mirror anymore. It was invading every part of my life. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my own exhausted reflection. "What do you want from me?" I screamed. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the fog began to form letters. "You know me." My knees buckled. What did that mean? Who was this? I stumbled out of the bathroom and slammed the door shut. But the words kept echoing in my mind. The message, "You know me," lingered in my mind like a haunting melody. It wasn't just random anymore. It was personal. The entity wanted something from me, and I needed to figure out what. I started combing through the apartment, looking for anything that could give me answers. I searched drawers, closets, and even under the bed, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Frustration mounted as I racked my brain. Why would this thing target me? That's when I remembered something the landlord had mentioned in passing during the lease signing. The previous tenant left a few things behind in the storage room. You can toss them if you don't need them. The storage room. I hadn't even opened it since moving in. The small storage room was cluttered with forgotten boxes and old furniture. Dust hung heavy in the air, and the dim light bulb cast eerie shadows on the walls. I started rifling through the boxes, most of which contained mundane items, old clothes, broken knickknacks, and yellowed papers. Then I found it, a small battered journal with a cracked leather cover. It looked ancient, the pages brittle and yellowed with age. The first entry was dated over a decade ago. The handwriting was neat but shaky, as if the writer had been nervous. If you're reading this, it means you've seen them too. The messages. The mirror is the key. My breath caught. This person, whoever they were, had experienced the same thing. The journal detailed the life of the previous tenant, a man named Richard. He'd moved into the apartment after losing his wife in a car accident. Grief-stricken and isolated, he started noticing the same phenomenon, messages appearing on the bathroom mirror. At first, the messages were simple, just like mine, but as the days went on, they became more aggressive, more personal. Richard believed the entity wasn't just haunting the mirror, it was tied to the apartment itself. One entry stopped me cold. The mirror isn't just a reflection, it's a doorway, and it wants out. The journal also revealed the origin of the mirror. It wasn't part of the apartment's original fixtures. Richard had found it in a thrift store and brought it home. According to him, the mirror had been donated under mysterious circumstances after its original owner died under unusual conditions. Richard described nights of terror, much like mine, waking up to find messages, hearing whispers, and feeling the suffocating presence of something watching him. The final entry was scrawled messily, the letters uneven and frantic. I can't take it anymore. If you're reading this, please don't let it out. That night, the apartment came alive with sounds. The creaks and groans I'd grown used to were now louder, almost deliberate, like footsteps. Shadows darted at the edges of my vision, and the temperature dropped until I could see my breath. I locked myself in the bedroom, but it didn't help. The mirror on the dresser began to fog up. Even though the room wasn't humid, words slowly formed. Why won't you help me? My heart raced as the dresser mirror seemed to darken, the reflection twisting into something grotesque. It was no longer my face staring back at me. It was something else. Desperate, I reached out to Mia again. She knew someone, a self-proclaimed medium, who could supposedly help with hauntings. At this point, I was willing to try anything. The medium arrived the next day. She was an older woman with piercing eyes and a calm demeanor. As she entered the apartment, her expression shifted to one of unease. "This place," she murmured, "has a heavy presence. Something is tied here, something old and desperate." She walked toward the bathroom and stopped in front of the mirror. "This is the source," she said. "It's not just a mirror. It's a conduit." The medium explained that mirrors have long been believed to be portals between the physical and spiritual worlds. "Whatever is trapped on the other side," she said, "has been trying to use you to break free." When I asked why it targeted me, her answer sent chills down my spine. "It seeks the lonely, the vulnerable. You fit its needs perfectly." She advised me to remove the mirror and destroy it, but warned that the entity might resist. "It will do anything to survive," she said. That evening, I steeled myself and decided to end this. Armed with a hammer, I approached the bathroom mirror. As soon as I lifted the hammer, the air grew heavy, and the room plunged into an unnatural cold. The mirror fogged over rapidly, and a message appeared. "Don't do this." I ignored it, my hands trembling as I swung the hammer. The impact sent shards flying across the bathroom, but instead of relief, I felt an overwhelming dread. The mirror didn't just break, it screamed, a guttural, otherworldly sound that made my ears ring and my knees buckle. I stumbled back, my head pounding. The shards of the mirror seemed to glisten unnaturally, and as I stared at them, I realized they were still reflecting my image, my fractured, distorted image. Then, one by one, the shards began to move. They slid across the floor, pulling together as if drawn by an invisible force. The reflection within them twisted and writhed, forming something that wasn't me. It stood up. The figure that emerged from the shards was humanoid, but wrong. Its features were a grotesque mockery of mine. Sunken eyes, a too wide smile, and jagged, shifting edges like broken glass. "You shouldn't have done that," it whispered in a voice that sounded like mine, only distorted. I backed away, but it followed, its movements jerky and unnatural. "You let me out," it said, "and now you'll take my place." My screams echoed in the apartment as the creature lunged. The entity lunged at me, its jagged form slicing through the air. With unnatural speed, I barely managed to dodge, crashing into the bathroom sink. Shards of the shattered mirror crunched under my hands as I scrambled to my feet. Its eyes, those hollow, glass-like voids, locked onto mine. "You invited me in," it hissed, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "Now, it's your turn. What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice trembling. My back pressed against the wall as it advanced, its fractured edges glinting In the dim light, "You," it said simply, its mouth splitting into a grin far too wide for its face. "You belong here now." I darted past it, my heart pounding as I bolted into the hallway. The apartment felt twisted, unfamiliar. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. Every step echoed, as if the space around me was shifting, warping. Behind me, I could hear the entity's jagged footsteps, the sound like glass scraping against tile. "You can't run," it whispered, though its voice echoed unnaturally through the apartment. I threw open the front door, but instead of the hallway outside, there was only darkness, an endless, suffocating void. "No," I gasped, slamming the door shut and turning back. The entity was waiting, standing at the end of the hall. "This is my world now," it said, its form flickering like a broken TV signal. "And you gave it to me." Something snapped in me then. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the realization that running wasn't an option. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a heavy floor lamp, and swung it as the creature lunged again. The lamp struck its torso, shattering part of its jagged form. The shards scattered across the floor, glimmering like pieces of a broken star. The creature screamed, the sound reverberating painfully in my ears. For a moment, it seemed to dissolve, its form splintering further. As it writhed on the ground, its shape fluctuating between solidity and shadow, the apartment seemed to stabilize. The walls stopped moving, and the air grew lighter. I stood over it. The lamp raised again. "What are you?" I demanded. It looked up at me, its broken face twisted in something resembling pain. "I was you," it said, its voice softer now, almost human. "What does that mean?" I shouted, the lamp shaking in my hands. "You brought me here," it whispered, its form flickering. "Your loneliness, your fear, your reflection. I grew from you." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The entity wasn't just some external force. It was a manifestation of my own isolation and despair, twisted into something monstrous by the mirror. I dropped the lamp, my mind racing. If the mirror had brought it here, maybe it could take it back. But the mirror was shattered. How could I reverse what I'd done? Then I remembered the journal, Richard's final warning. Don't let it out. He hadn't destroyed the mirror. He'd contained it. I sprinted to the storage room, the entity's fractured form dragging itself after me. Its voice was weaker now, pleading. "You can't lock me away again," it said. "We're the same." Ignoring it, I grabbed the journal and flipped to the final pages. There, scrawled in messy handwriting, was a crude ritual, a way to seal the mirror's power. The ritual required a reflective surface, salt, and fire. My heart sank as I realized I'd have to use one of the remaining shards of the broken mirror. I hurried back to the bathroom, grabbing a shard from the floor. The entity was faster now, regaining its strength. It lunged at me as I poured a circle of salt around myself and the shard. The moment the circle was complete, the entity froze, its form trembling. "You can't do this," it hissed, its voice cracking. I ignored it, reciting the words from the journal. The shard began to glow faintly, the light growing brighter as the entity thrashed against the barrier. The air grew heavy, the apartment shaking as the creature screamed. Its form began to dissolve, drawn back into the shard, like water being sucked into a drain. The entity's form flickered one last time, its face contorting in rage. "You'll never be free of me," it spat. "I'll always be here, in your reflection, in your thoughts." With a final scream, it vanished, the shard glowing red hot before cooling to a dull gray. The apartment fell silent, the air was still, the walls solid. It was over. I collapsed to the floor, clutching the shard in my trembling hands. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I could breathe again. I spent the next day cleaning up the mess, the shattered mirror, the salt, the broken furniture. The apartment felt lighter now, but I couldn't shake the memory of the entity's parting words. I placed the shard in a box, wrapping it carefully before tucking it away in the storage room. As I closed the door, I hesitated, half expecting to hear a whisper or feel the air grow heavy again. But there was only silence. That night, as I got ready for bed, I glanced at the bathroom mirror, the replacement I'd bought earlier. My reflection stared back at me, tired but whole. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. But as I turned to leave, a faint shape flickered in the corner of the mirror. It was brief, so quick I almost missed it. Almost. The words appeared just as I turned off the light. "I'm still here." The days following the confrontation felt surreal. The apartment was quiet now. Too quiet. For the first time in weeks, there were no creaks in the night, no shadows dancing at the edge of my vision. The air, once heavy and suffocating, was light again, but the scars remained. Every time I passed a reflective surface, I caught myself glancing twice, looking for something that shouldn't be there. The words from the mirror, "I'm still here," echoed in my mind like a song I couldn't forget. I told myself it was over. I had sealed the shard. The entity was gone, wasn't it? I decided I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. The memories were too strong, the paranoia too deep. I packed up my things and left the key on the counter. The landlord didn't ask why I was leaving so soon. He looked almost relieved. My new place was different, modern, with clean lines and bright windows. No history, no strange noises. It was exactly what I needed. The first night, I slept without nightmares. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. But the peace didn't last. One morning, as I got ready for work, I noticed something strange. The bathroom mirror in the new apartment was pristine and unblemished. But as I brushed my teeth, I thought I saw a faint mark in the condensation. A single word, "Hello." I wiped it away, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd written it absent-mindedly. Maybe I was imagining things. But the knot of fear in my stomach told me otherwise. Desperate for answers, I returned to the storage room in the old apartment. The landlord let me in with little more than a shrug. The box with the shard was still there, exactly where I'd left it. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling. When I lifted the lid, the shard was dull and lifeless, as if the energy that once pulsed within it had finally faded. Relief washed over me. Maybe the entity was truly gone. As I turned to leave, my foot kicked something. It was the journal, the one left behind by Richard, the previous tenant. I picked it up, flipping through the pages again. searching for any clue I might have missed. One entry caught my eye, scrawled in shaky handwriting near the back. Even if you seal it, it's never truly gone. It lingers, waiting for another crack, another opening. It always finds a way back. The words sent a chill through me. I closed the journal and shoved it back into the box, my mind racing. That night, I sat in my new apartment, staring at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. It looked normal, just me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the other side. The journal's words played over and over in my mind. It always finds a way back. I turned off the bathroom light, stepping into the hallway, but just as I reached the bedroom, a familiar sound stopped me cold, a faint tapping. It was coming from the mirror. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned back toward the bathroom. The door was ajar, the faint glow of moonlight illuminating the edges of the mirror. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and then I saw it, the faint outline of a hand pressing against the inside of the glass. A single word appeared, slowly etching itself into the surface, the letters jagged and uneven. Help! My heart pounded as I backed away, but something kept my eyes locked on the mirror. The hand moved again, the tapping turning into a steady, rhythmic knock. Finally, the last message appeared, the letters large and bold. It's your turn. The mirror shattered. Every night, my mirror shows a different room. I always loved the charm of old apartments, the creaky wooden floors, the high ceilings, the air of mystery that seemed to linger in every corner. When I found this place, tucked away on a quiet street with ivy creeping up its brick walls, I thought I'd stumbled upon a hidden gem. The rent was surprisingly affordable. The landlord seemed eager to lease it, and the apartment came furnished. It was perfect, or so I thought. As I unpacked my boxes in the bedroom, my eyes landed on the mirror. It stood against the wall, its frame a masterpiece of carved wood with intricate floral patterns that seemed to twist and curl like living vines. The glass itself was pristine, unnervingly clear for something that looked so old. That's quite the heirloom, I muttered to myself, running a hand along the smooth wood. It didn't seem to belong to the otherwise modest decor of the apartment. That evening, after the chaos of unpacking, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my teeth. My reflection stared back at me, tired but satisfied. It was just a mirror, nothing special. I turned off the light and crawled into bed. The apartment creaked and groaned as old buildings do, and I drifted off to sleep, comforted by the thought of my new life here. But something woke me in the middle of the night, a faint noise, like distant laughter, echoing softly through the apartment. I sat up, my heart pounding. The room was dark, save for the pale moonlight streaming through the curtains. I glanced around, seeing nothing unusual. When my eyes fell on the mirror, I froze. It wasn't reflecting my room. Instead, it showed what looked like a grand ballroom, illuminated by dozens of golden chandeliers. The floor gleamed as if freshly polished, and heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows that stretched impossibly high. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The ballroom was still there, silent and empty. Am I hallucinating? I whispered aloud, my voice trembling. I got up and approached the mirror cautiously, my reflection nowhere to be found. When I touched the glass, it was cool and solid beneath my fingers. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the ballroom was gone. The mirror once again showed my bedroom, my pale, frightened face staring back at me. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off. Just the stress of moving, I told myself, as I poured a cup of coffee. Old buildings had their quirks, right? Maybe the glass warped in the moonlight, creating some kind of optical illusion. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of the ballroom. It had been too vivid, too real. I decided to call my best friend, Sarah, and tell her about it. She was the kind of person who could make anything seem less terrifying. "Let me get this straight," she said after I recounted the story. "You're saying your mirror showed you a fancy ballroom in the middle of the night?" "I know it sounds crazy," I admitted. "Crazy? It sounds awesome. Maybe it's one of those magic mirrors, like in fairy tales. Or maybe I'm losing my mind," I muttered. She laughed. "If you're losing your mind, at least you're doing it in style. Seriously, though, it's probably nothing. Old mirrors can do weird things with light. Just keep an eye on it. And, hey, if it starts showing you the future, call me first." Her teasing made me feel a little better. Maybe it really was just an old mirror being weird. That night, I found myself staring at the mirror again, half hoping and half dreading that something strange would happen. For hours, it was just a mirror. My reflection stared back at me, the same as always. Satisfied that it was all in my head, I turned off the light and climbed into bed. But just as I was drifting off, the laughter returned. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, soft and distant, like it was coming from another room. My eyes flew open, and I turned toward the mirror. This time, it showed a dimly lit forest. Tall, skeletal trees stretched toward a starless sky, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers. A thin layer of fog curled along the forest floor, moving unnaturally, almost as if it were alive. The laughter grew louder, echoing eerily through the glass. I sat up, gripping the edge of the bed. My reflection was gone again, replaced by the eerie forest. Then I saw it, a shadow darting between the trees, too fast to make out. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The shadow stopped. Slowly, it turned, and two glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, staring straight at me. My breath hitched, and I scrambled out of bed, flipping on the light. The mirror went dark. The next morning, I didn't call Sarah. I didn't want to hear her laugh or tell me I was imagining things. I needed to figure this out on my own. I inspected the mirror in the daylight, running my hands along the frame, searching for anything unusual. There were no hidden compartments, no signs of tampering. It was just a mirror, or so it seemed. That evening, I tried to avoid the bedroom altogether, opting to watch TV in the living room until I couldn't keep my eyes open. But when I finally went to bed, I couldn't resist looking at the mirror one last time. It showed my reflection. For now, the next night, I couldn't bring myself to look at the mirror. I left the bathroom light on, hoping that would somehow keep the strange images away. But as the hours ticked by, the familiar laughter returned, low and eerie, Growing louder with each passing minute, I turned toward the mirror, half expecting to see my reflection staring back. Instead, the dark forest from the previous night emerged. The skeletal trees swayed unnaturally, though there was no wind. The fog curled along the ground, and deep in the shadows, those glowing eyes appeared again. This time, they didn't dart away. They held their gaze, watching me. And then, from somewhere in the darkness, I heard a whisper, "Come closer." I froze, my body paralyzed with fear. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. The lamp on my bedside table flickered and died, leaving only the faint glow of the mirror illuminating the forest. A shadow began to emerge from the fog, its form humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. My heart raced as I reached for the light switch, fumbling in the dark. The instant the light flooded the room, the mirror went blank. My reflection stared back at me, pale and terrified. The following night, I stayed up late again, staring at the mirror from a safe distance. Hours passed, and nothing happened. Relief washed over me as I began to think maybe the mirror had stopped. Then, at 3 a.m., the shift happened. The mirror fogged over, and a new scene emerged. This time, it showed what looked like an abandoned hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting an eerie glow on the cracked tile floor. Rusted gurneys and overturned chairs littered the hallway, and dried blood stained the walls. A faint beeping sound echoed from somewhere deep in the corridor, accompanied by the slow, rhythmic squeak of a wheelchair's wheels. I leaned forward, unable to tear my eyes away. From the far end of the hallway, a figure began to appear. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as it drew closer, I could make out the details. A patient in a hospital gown, their head tilted at an unnatural angle, dragging a limp leg behind them. The wheelchair followed, moving on its own. Suddenly, the patient stopped and turned toward me. Their face was pale and featureless, and yet I could feel their gaze piercing through me. The mirror went dark again, leaving me shaking and gasping for air. A week passed, and every night brought a new room, an endless hallway of locked doors, a crumbling library filled with torn books, and finally, a candlelit church. The church was the most unsettling yet. It was vast, with tall, arched ceilings and rows of pews that stretched into the darkness. The candles flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. At the altar, a figure stood, shrouded in black. Its head was bowed, as if in prayer, but its hands were clasped around something sharp, a knife glinting in the candlelight. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to reach out and touch the glass. My hand moved on its own, trembling as it hovered inches from the surface. The figure at the altar lifted its head. It was my face staring back at me, distorted and twisted into a malevolent grin. I pulled my hand away, stumbling back and nearly tripping over the edge of the bed. When I looked again, my reflection had returned, but something wasn't right. The person in the mirror looked like me, but their movements were off, delayed by half a second, as if they were mimicking me. Raised my hand, and the reflection followed, but the grin on its face didn't match my expression. "What are you?" I whispered. The reflection tilted its head, its grin widening. Then it mouthed 3 words. "You'll find out." The next day, I decided I couldn't ignore this any longer. I needed to know where the mirror came from. I started with the landlord, who seemed reluctant to talk. "The mirror's been there for years," he said, avoiding eye contact. "It belonged to the original owner of the building. She didn't like people messing with it." "Why not?" I pressed. He hesitated. "There were rumors. People said she was into strange things. Rituals, seances, that kind of stuff. She disappeared one day, and the mirror was the only thing left behind. That wasn't enough. I needed more." I turned to the local library, scouring old newspapers and public records. That's when I found her. Eleanor Grayson, a reclusive woman who had lived in the building in the 1920s. She was known for hosting mysterious gatherings and had a reputation as a spiritualist. One article mentioned her sudden disappearance, with only a cryptic note left behind. "The mirror is my legacy. It sees all." The more I researched, the more horrifying the mirror's history became. Several accounts mentioned it being passed down through families, each one experiencing unexplainable phenomena. Disappearances, deaths, and madness seemed to follow wherever the mirror went. One particularly chilling story described a man who claimed the mirror had shown him a vision of his own death. Days later, he was found dead in his apartment, his body positioned exactly as it had been in the reflection. As I pieced together the mirror's history, one thing became clear. It wasn't just a window to other places. It was a trap, and I was its latest victim. That night, I sat in front of the mirror, armed with the knowledge I had gathered. I needed to confront it, to understand what it wanted. The room was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. At exactly midnight, the mirror began to fog. A new room appeared. A stark, white void with no discernible features. And then I saw myself. My reflection stepped out of the void, standing on the other side of the glass. It didn't mimic my movements this time. It stared at me, unblinking, its grin wide and unnatural. "I've been waiting," it said, its voice a warped echo of mine. "For what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "For you," it replied, pressing its hands against the glass. Cracks began to spiderweb across the surface, and I realized with dawning horror that the barrier between us was breaking. The mirror consumed my thoughts. Each night, it showed me something new, and each vision was worse than the last. I needed answers, real answers, not just rumors or vague suspicions. I went back to the library and requested access to archived records, hoping to dig deeper into Eleanor Grayson and the mirror's origins. The librarian hesitated when I mentioned Eleanor's name. "She was unusual," the librarian said cautiously, leading me to a dusty archive room. "People used to call her a witch. She dabbled in things most wouldn't understand or want to." Among the yellowed papers and faded photographs, I found an old journal. It was bound in cracked leather, the pages brittle and covered in spidery handwriting. The entries confirmed what the librarian had said. Eleanor had been obsessed with the supernatural, particularly mirrors. She believed they were windows to the soul, and claimed to have found an artisan capable of turning that idea into reality. The artisan's name was Adrian Marchant, a reclusive craftsman whose mirrors were said to hold strange powers. Marchant had vanished years before Eleanor's disappearance, leaving behind a legacy shrouded in mystery and fear. Eleanor's journal detailed her obsession with Marchant's work. She wrote about visiting his workshop, describing it as a place filled with shimmering reflections that whispered secrets. One entry stood out. Adrian told me the mirror would reflect not just the body, but the spirit. It will show the Iwe rooms of the soul, the places we inhabit in life and death. But he warned me, if the mirror is misused, it can become a prison, trapping the unwary forever. The final pages were frantic, the handwriting erratic. The mirror shows me things I cannot unsee, rooms that were never mine, faces I do not know. I hear them calling, begging. They say the mirror needs a keeper, and I cannot refuse. But I am afraid. It hungers. That night, the mirror seemed more alive than ever. The room it showed was different, a Victorian parlor, richly decorated with velvet drapes and ornate furniture. I reached out instinctively, and to my horror, my hand didn't meet glass. It went through. The cold air of the parlor enveloped my fingers, and I yanked my hand back. The mirror rippled like water before settling again. The room's details sharpened, and objects began to move on their own. A rocking chair creaked as if someone invisible sat in it. A clock on the wall chimed, though its hands didn't move. Then the voices started. "Help us," they whispered, faint and mournful. "Don't let it keep us." Figures pressed against the glass from the other side, distorted faces with hollow eyes, their mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. "Who are you?" I whispered. One figure stepped forward, a young woman with a pale, translucent face. Her lips moved, but her voice was faint, almost drowned out by the others. "The mirror," she said, "traps us. It feeds on fear. Don't let it take you." The next day, I searched every corner of the apartment for more clues. In the storage room, tucked behind a pile of old furniture, I found a small wooden chest. Inside were photographs, letters, and a pocket watch engraved with the initials AM, Adrian Marchant. The photographs showed Marchant's mirrors, each one unique and intricately designed. But the faces in the mirrors weren't reflections. They were people, staring out as if trapped. One letter, written in Marchant's elegant handwriting, sent chills down my spine. "Eleanor, the mirror is a tool, not a toy. It will show you the truth of the soul, but it demands balance. If the mirror is abused, it will take more than it gives. Do not underestimate its hunger." That night, I confronted the mirror. I stood in front of it, holding the pocket watch, the journal, and the photographs. "What do you want?" I demanded. The mirror fogged over, and words began to appear, scrawled in jagged letters. "A keeper." "A keeper of what?" I asked, my voice trembling. The words shifted. "Souls." The glass rippled, and a new room appeared. A cavernous space filled with mirrors, each one showing a different trapped figure. The young woman I'd seen before was there, along with dozens of others, their faces turned toward me in unison. "You must take its place," they said, their voices overlapping in an eerie chorus. "Or it will take you." I pieced it together, the horrifying truth. The mirror wasn't just a window, it was a portal. It showed the rooms of the soul, the places where people's essence lingered after death. But it wasn't content to simply reflect. It consumed. Eleanor had been the mirror's keeper, feeding its souls to sustain its power. When she disappeared, the mirror began to starve, luring new victims to take her place. And now, it had chosen me. The mirror's pull grew stronger with each passing night. The rooms it showed became more interactive, more invasive. One night, I woke to find myself standing in front of the mirror, my hand pressed against the glass. I didn't remember getting up. The room on the other side was my bedroom. But something was wrong. The furniture was reversed, and my reflection was missing. Instead, the young woman stared back at me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I mouthed, "What do I do?" She raised a hand, pointing to the pocket watch I had found. I returned to the journal, searching for anything that could help me destroy the mirror. In one of the earlier entries, Eleanor had written about the pocket watch. Adrian warned me, the mirror is tied to the watch. It is the key and the lock. If the watch is broken, the mirror's connection to this world will shatter. It was a gamble, but I had no other choice. The journal's words echoed in my mind. The mirror is tied to the watch. It is the key and the lock. If the watch is broken, the mirror's connection to this world will shatter. I sat on the floor, the pocket watch in one hand and Eleanor's journal in the other. The mirror loomed in front of me, its surface disturbingly calm, as if waiting for me to make the first move. The fear that had gripped me for weeks was replaced by a cold determination. This thing had haunted me long enough. It had to end. I took a deep breath, clutching the watch tightly. Let's finish this. As I stepped toward the mirror, its surface rippled like water, and words began to appear. "You will fail." I ignored the taunt and raised the watch, preparing to smash it against the floor. But before I could move, the room around me dissolved. The walls and furniture melted away, replaced by the endless forest I had seen in the mirror. The skeletal trees twisted and swayed, their branches clawing at the sky. Fog curled at my feet, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. Laughter echoed through the trees, faint at first, but growing louder. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" A voice hissed, the sound coming from everywhere and nowhere. I spun around, clutching the watch like a lifeline. Shadows darted between the trees, just out of reach. The laughter gave way to whispers, each one piercing and familiar. They weren't just random voices. They were my own thoughts, twisted into something cruel. "You're nothing without me," one voice said. "Everyone leaves you in the end," another whispered. The shadows began to take shape, forming into people I knew, my parents, my friends, even Sarah. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. "Why didn't you save us?" they asked in unison, their voices dripping with accusation. I stumbled back, shaking my head. "You're not real," I said, my voice trembling. "Are you sure?" One of them replied, stepping closer. It was Sarah. Her face contorted into a grotesque smile, and her hand reached for mine. I clutched the pocket watch, focusing on its weight in my hand. "This is just an illusion," I told myself. "It's the mirror trying to stop me." The shadows closed in, their whispers growing louder. Just as I raised the watch to smash it, The ground beneath me gave way. I fell, plunging into darkness. When I landed, I was in a new room, a Victorian parlor with velvet drapes and ornate furniture. The air was heavy, and the ticking of a grandfather clock filled the silence. The mirror stood at the center of the room, its surface glowing faintly. I approached it cautiously, the pocket watch still clutched in my hand. My reflection appeared in the glass, but it didn't move when I did. Instead, it spoke. "You can't escape," it said, its voice cold and detached. "You are already mine." The mirror rippled, and the parlor dissolved into another room, a hospital corridor. The walls were cracked, the fluorescent lights flickering. Dried blood stained the floor, and the faint squeak of a wheelchair's wheels echoed down the hallway. I moved cautiously, my breath shallow. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar, light spilling out into the darkness. As I reached for the handle, a hand shot out from the shadows, gripping my wrist. I turned, coming face to face with one of the trapped souls. "You have to hurry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's waking up." "What is?" I asked, my heart pounding. "The mirror," she replied, her hollow eyes filled with desperation. "It knows you're trying to break it." The soul released me, fading into the shadows. I pushed open the door, stepping into a dimly lit room, filled with shelves lined with mirrors. Each one showed a different face. Trapped souls, their eyes pleading for help. At the center of the room, a pedestal held an artifact. Small, intricately carved hammer. I approached it cautiously, the whispers of the trapped souls growing louder. As I reached for the hammer, the mirror on the far wall cracked, and a shadowy figure began to emerge. The creature was humanoid, but grotesque, its limbs too long, its face a featureless void. It moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in seconds. I grabbed the hammer, swung it instinctively. The creature shrieked as the hammer connected, its form dissolving into smoke. With the hammer in one hand and the pocket watch in the other, I ran back toward the central mirror. Its surface glowed brighter as the trapped souls pressed against it, their faces twisted in desperation. "You can't do this," the mirror hissed, its voice filling the room. "If you break me, you'll be trapped here forever." I hesitated, the hammer trembling in my hand. The young woman's face appeared in the mirror, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You have to do it," she said. "It's the only way to free us." I raised the hammer and struck the pocket watch against the mirror. The glass shattered, fragments flying in every direction. The room shook violently, and the light from the mirror grew blinding. When the light faded, I was back in my apartment. The mirror was gone, replaced by an empty frame. The pocket watch lay at my feet, broken and lifeless. The apartment was silent, but it wasn't the oppressive silence I had come to fear. It was peaceful, almost comforting. I looked around, half expecting to see the shadowy figures or hear the whispers. But there was nothing. It was over. As I cleaned up the broken pieces of the pocket watch, I thought I heard a faint sound, a whisper, so soft I almost missed it. "Thank you," it said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Turning toward the empty frame, I saw my reflection staring back, but this time, it was just me, tired but free. The first morning after the mirror was destroyed, I woke to silence, a true silence, not the oppressive, watchful kind I had grown used to. The apartment felt lighter, as if a dark presence had been lifted. The air was fresh, untainted by the metallic smell that had haunted me for weeks. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. The memory of the mirror's rooms lingered in my mind, like a scar, vivid and unrelenting. I walked through the apartment, half expecting to see cracks in the walls or hear whispers in the shadows, but everything was normal, peaceful. I should have been relieved, but instead, I felt hollow. As the days passed, I tried to return to my old routines, making coffee, reading, and going for walks, but the mirror's presence clung to me, a shadow I couldn't escape. I found myself avoiding reflective surfaces. The sight of my own face in a window or a puddle sent chills down my spine. At night, I dreamed of the rooms, the forest, the hospital, the parlor. They replayed in my mind like a broken record. The faces of the trapped souls stared at me, their silent pleas echoing long after I woke. I began to wonder if destroying the mirror had truly set them free, or had I only made things worse. One evening, as I cleaned up the last remnants of the mirror's destruction, I found something I had missed. A single shard of glass lay under the couch, its edges jagged and sharp. I picked it up, my breath catching. As I turned it over in my hand, the surface shimmered faintly, reflecting the dim light of the room. At first, it showed only my face, but as I tilted it, the image shifted. A new room appeared in the shard, a perfect replica of my apartment. The furniture was the same, down to the crooked lamp on the bedside table, but the light in the room was wrong. Too dim, too cold, and then I saw it. In the reflection, a figure stood in the corner, shrouded in shadow. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze fixed on me, watching from the other side of the glass. I dropped the shard, my heart pounding. It landed with a sharp clink on the hardwood floor. But when I bent to pick it up again, the image was gone. It was just a piece of glass, or so I told myself. I wrapped the shard in a cloth and stuffed it into a drawer, determined to forget about it. But the unease lingered. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a sound, a faint knock. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill down my spine. I sat up, straining to listen. The knock came again, louder this time. It was coming from the drawer. I approached the drawer cautiously, my heart racing. The knocking continued, steady and deliberate. When I opened the drawer, the shard was glowing faintly. Its surface shimmered, and a single word appeared in jagged letters. "Hello." I slammed the drawer shut and backed away, my hands trembling. The knocking stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. I turned off every light in the apartment, hoping to drown the shard in darkness. But as I crawled back into bed, I heard a whisper. "You can't escape." The days that followed were a blur. I avoided the drawer, refusing to acknowledge the shard's existence. But the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. One night, I found myself drawn to the shard, unable to resist its pull. I opened the drawer, my hands shaking, and held the shard up to the light. The room in the reflection had changed. It was no longer a replica of my apartment. It was the Victorian parlor, its furniture eerily still, the rocking chair swaying gently on its own. And in the mirror above the fireplace, I saw myself, not my reflection, me. I stood in the mirror, staring back at myself with hollow eyes, and then I smiled. I dropped the shard, my heart racing. For a moment, the apartment was silent. Then, the knocking started again. This time, it wasn't coming from the shard. It was coming from the bathroom mirror.